as well as a member of our Environment Committee. I'm a second-generation cottager on Lake Muskoka. So we could have a look at the results of our poll. So maybe Erla, you prop those up for us. All right, great showing from MLA members. That's terrific. And hearing from the MLA emails mostly. A lot of folks in Muskoka, still some in the GTA haven't got up to the cottage yet. I'm just going this weekend for the first time myself. And a good disbandering across the lakes. Of course, Township Muskoka Lakes, where most of our members reside, is well represented tonight. A bunch of you have not read the water quality report, so that's on your to-do list. And we've got some that have read it very comprehensively, but and those that have skimmed it. So and then many of you just look at the results for your area. So that's 28% of you. We have about half of those who responded who are our water quality volunteers, and thank you so much for doing that for us. It's really a great service that you provide. Many of you are expressing concerns about water quality in your area: blue-green algae, sediment, bacteria, swimmer's itch, foam. We get a lot of waves at where I am at Breezy Point, and we get a lot of foam some days. So certainly those are concerns that you're going to hear more about tonight for some of them, and we'll be tracking those issues as time closes. All right, so we'll close the poll results for now, and we're going to move on with our program. So let me introduce our webinar topic, What's in Your Water? So tonight we're going to talk about the importance and the philosophy of the MLA's water quality monitoring program. We're going to talk about the 2021 water quality report that was completed by Hutchison Environmental Sciences Limited. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what you can do to keep and improve your local water quality. Good water quality is one of Muskoka's attractive features and at the root of many rules that are in place for septic systems, setbacks from the lake, and vegetation protection. In a recent survey of the MLA members, 93% told us that they value good water quality for swimming. And similarly, 87% worry about the degradation of water quality with development and climate change. As you may know, the Muskoka Lakes Association has a water quality testing program, and that's been active for over 20 years. Over 100 volunteers take to the lakes 4 times a year to measure the phosphorus content of the water, its clarity, and its bacterial counts. Phosphorus is a nutrient that makes plants grow. We all use it in our gardens. It occurs naturally in nature as plants break down, and it's part of human and animal waste as well. So always present, but too much of a good thing will cause vegetation and algal growth, thus making our water less clear and less pleasant to swim in. And bacteria can make one very sick if ingested. So we analyze those results and we report on them for many areas throughout Muskoka. It's a lot to review, especially if you're not too knowledgeable about water quality and what it means. So the good news is that we've brought our experts in tonight to talk about what's in the water and what it means and what you can do to keep your water just the way you like it. So let's get going. Here's what's going to happen. Each of our panelists are going to make a presentation about somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes long, and they'll provide an overview of their topic area. Then we're going to have time for questions to the panelists. We'll be taking what I call questions from the floor, which is also known as the Q&A box, as contributed, and then the participants will be answering. The participants can go through the chat box, and contribute the questions. A few housekeeping rules. First, all the participants are muted, and you're not going to be able to speak tonight or show us your smiles on video. You will find a Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to ask a panelist a question, just type it in the box and press enter to have it posted. If you want to direct it to a specific panelist, just put the name of the person that you'd like to speak to it. You're going to be able to vote up a question. So if you like it, and someone's already entered a question that you would like to see answered, just like it, and then it will move it up the ladder in terms of more likes will bring it to the top. So it reduces repetition, and it's more likely that you will be able to get your question answered. I want to remind you, this is a respectful conversation this evening, and I would ask that all questions are framed that way. And if we can't get to all the questions, we will endeavor to get answers for you and post them with the webinar. To our panelists, reminder to use your mute button when you're not speaking. This webinar is being recorded so that members or others who were not able to attend will be able to listen at their leisure. So let's get started. Our first speaker is Chris Craig. Chris is the brains behind the Water Quality Monitoring Program of the MLA and chair of our Environment Committee. Chris is the director of the Muskoka Lakes Association. Since 2019, he's been a provincially appointed advisor to the Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks on flooding and environment in the Muskoka River watershed as part of the Muskoka Watershed Advisory Group. A substantial portion of his 45-year engineering career has been spent on dam safety, particularly at Ontario Power Generation's 70 hydroelectric power stations, which include over 200 dams. He's written some 40 technical papers and conference presentations, including most recently, the evolution of water management in the Muskoka River watershed for the Muskoka Watershed Council. And he is also the writer of the Muskoka Flood Watch, which is a very popular publication come spring. So Chris, I'd ask you to turn your camera on and your mic on and share your screen and give us your presentation. Thank you.
Are you seeing the presentation? No,
Not yet, but it sometimes
We're in the
takes a
wrong
minute
one.
to, oh.
Just a minute. There we go. Is that visible now, Deb?
Not yet, but sometimes it just takes a minute to come up, so. Did you press share? It's not coming up yet. We practiced this yesterday. You want the office to put it up for you?
How's that?
Not yet. Why don't we have the office put it up, assuming you've given it to them? Chris, do you want me to get the office to do?
Out there now.
No. Okay, can the office put it up, please?
Give us a minute here, Deb. We'll try.
My apologies.
Maybe while we're waiting, maybe make just a few introductory remarks there, Chris.
Try again.
Chris, we don't have your final presentation. You could try and maybe I can try walking you through this. Just click share screen on the bottom.
Yep.
What do you see when you hit that?
I just see the Zoom presentation.
When you click share screen at the bottom
Okay.
there, you see an eye.
Okay,
Sorry, go ahead.
okay, I've got the right one. How about that?
Yes, there we go. All right, now just put it into presentation mode. It's not there. There we go. Now go back to the beginning. Okay, phew, there we go. Take it away, Chris.
So, welcome everybody. I'm going to talk a little bit about the MLA's background in water quality testing, which stretches back to when the MLA was founded in 1894. Its founding principles included member advocacy, environmental protection, and a healthy encouragement for water sports. So we're just going to talk about the environmental preservation at this point. And as you can see, we started promoting septic tanks with our members back in 1903. Boy, in the 20s, things weren't that clean on the lakes, and there were no holds for septic output on the lake boats, and the MLA advocated with the steamship to put in holds for sanitary waste. Come to the 1970s, there was a lot of algae forming on the lakes, and the MLA worked with the cottagers to get rid of phosphates and detergents and soaps, and try and clean up the phosphorus input that caused the algae. In the 80s, those who might remember, there was a big concern that the lakes were going very acid. It was killing off the fish and the wildlife. The acid was coming from coal plants, particularly coal plants south of the border. And so there was an international group formed to try and clean up the air. And that was the Coalition Against Acid Rain, eventually very successful. And our current program, well, that started in 2002. And the first consultant on that was none other than Neil Hutchison, the founder of the firm, who's our current consultant. So our program covers many sites across the lakes, and the intent is to discover issues with water quality at an early stage so that remediation can be pursued. We test deep water in the major bays, and we test near the shore, near locations where there's potential contaminants, in an effort to discover early things that are not going right and to help correct them before they go too wrong. So why do we protect recreational water quality? We want to keep the water clear for swimming. We want to protect swimmers from pathogens in the water like swimmer's itch or infections. We want to guard against proliferation of algae, and currently blue-green algae. And we want to preserve the waters for recreational use. So as Deb has said, one of the prime things that we monitor is phosphorus. Phosphorus can be naturally occurring from degradation of natural materials, or it can come from fertilizers used for agriculture or golf courses, or it can come from detergents and soaps. So to the degree that we keep those under control, we can manage the phosphorus pretty well. The phosphorus used to be the gold standard for water quality, but we're finding now that the phosphorus levels have declined and are pretty even and well below the tipping point of 20, that other things are becoming more of an issue. We used to think that if we controlled nutrients, that algae wouldn't that's not the case. And so now we're trying to find out the other possibility that are needed to be under control to keep our waters clean and safe. So one of the things that we're finding is that the calcium levels in lakes are going down. And that is a concern because one of the things that keeps our lakes clean are zooplankton, and zooplankton have skeletons. And if the skeletons of these animals are harmed by not having enough calcium, well, they're not there, and they're not there to eat the algae and keep the lakes clean. And you can see that we have a lot of areas of concern, particularly up towards Algonquin Park, the red areas, but also some down here on the Georgian Bay end of our watershed. We're also finding that chloride, which is coming from road salt, heavy use of road salt. And we used to think that road salt concentrations like 120 were okay for not affecting our zooplankton. Recent studies have shown us that we're really wrong on that score, and the real number is 10. And as you can see on this graph, we're starting to get well above 10 in Greenhurst Bay, and that's not good news for our friends zooplankton. So we're keeping track of several things then. We're keeping track of the phosphorus. We're keeping track of the E. coli or bacteria that's harmful for swimmers. We're keeping track of things that harm the algae because the algae, that harm zooplankton, which eat the algae. So not only, and then we're looking at both calcium and we're looking at chlorine. And we're trying to keep that stuff out of the water by preserving the shoreline so that when we have rains, pollution that doesn't get washed into the lake. And the other thing that we're finding is that with climate change, increased temperatures are making algae more abundant, and increased temperatures are making it harder for the zooplankton to live. So climate change is right in there, making some of the things that we're trying to control worse. So from being something that was of concern with just phosphorus, now we're more concerned with things that affect the microorganisms in the lake, the algae that eating zooplankton. There are little lawnmowers, and they are also the food source for our fish. And of course, once they're feeding the fish, the small fish eat the big fish, and they then look after our birds and our other things that make our lakes great. So I'll now turn back to Deb, and we'll go on from there.
Well, thank you, Chris. I'm sure glad you got that presentation rolling.
Me too.
That was great. Good introduction to what we're speaking about. So our next speaker is Dr. Chris Hadley. Chris is a biologist, paleolimnologist, and I hope you'll tell everyone what that is, Chris, when you get to speak, and a water quality specialist. He's based in Kitchener, Ontario. He began working on lake systems in 2005 as a master's student in the Canadian Arctic. He joined Hutchison Environmental Sciences Limited in 2013 after completing his postdoctoral work at the Ontario Ministry of Environment. Over the last 15 years, diverse projects have expanded his expertise in lake management across Canada, He's become a statistical specialist and spatial analyst working with large data sets to assess complex environmental problems. I'm not sure ours is overly complex, but Chris is very much engaged in working with us to make sure we've analyzed our data. So Chris, I'd ask you to turn your camera on and take it away.
Thanks, Deb. Paleolimnologist is somebody who studies lakes using fossil records that are preserved in lake sediments, which is something that I used to do as a graduate student, but haven't been able to do in quite some time as a consultant. It's been a long time since I've been a paleolimnologist, but thank you for the introduction. So I'm here to talk about the Water Quality Initiative program, about what we sampled in 2021. This is my first year working with the program. It had been in the hands of Beacon Environmental for a number of years. Neil, who was my former boss and is on the call right now, I saw when I was looking through the attendees, started the program with the MLA, but I took it over last year. So this will be my first year analyzing the data set and working with the data set, and it is a very large data set. My presentation will just go over a brief project background, talk about what we analyzed in 2021, a quick overview of the results. We won't be able to show the results from the entire project because of the scope of the project, but I'll direct people to the report for their own specific area or lake or of interest. And then I'll go over briefly some of the project recommendations. Again, not all of the project recommendations for the interest of brevity. As Chris introduced, the program has been sampling for this was the 20th year in 2021. We lost 2020 due to COVID, but this was year 20 of sampling. Monitoring takes place in 55 areas, which are lakes, rivers, or abayments of the three large lakes, Muskoka, Joseph, and Rosso. Over 680 samples were collected in 2021 between May and October. And you can see the same map that Chris presented earlier showing the basics of the program where we sampled. It's one of the largest water quality programs I've ever worked with. I believe it is the largest water quality program in Canada and possibly North America. Certainly citizen science run, I think that would be true. What we analyzed in 2021, so the total phosphorus Chris introduced, it's a vital nutrient. And as Deb said, it is necessary, but total phosphorus in too high a concentration can result in algal blooms. Bacteria, we look at E. coli, that's sort of the health standard of bacteria in terms of recreational uses of water quality and risk to people. And cyanobacteria or blue-green algae, we did not specifically sample cyanobacteria ourselves, but the MLA does track blooms reported and confirmed by the MECP, and lakes with blooms are included in our grading system of the various areas that we look at. So I'll get into the grades in just a moment here on the next slide. But you can see that we grade based on those three key parameters, which are algae blooms, phosphorus trends or concentrations, and E. coli concentrations. And with the green light being everything is looking good in the watershed, a yellow light being there's some cause for interest or maybe additional monitoring, and a red light being a cause for a more immediate action, whether that be additional monitoring or communication with the district or remediation plans or that sort of thing. What specifically would be done at a red light typically depends on the specific circumstances of that red light. So that's the grading system, which I will, it was updated in 2019 in order to align the goals of the grading system with what the district was doing with their official plan policy, specifically looking at phosphorus, the phosphorus threshold of 20 micrograms per liter, which is what is used to trigger, one of the triggers that is used to trigger causation studies for the district. So why do we monitor nutrients? Nutrients, particularly phosphorus, is it's the limiting nutrient on growth in most of the lakes that we're concerned with in the Muskoka and Halliburton area, particularly in the Muskoka areas. It is an increase in phosphorus beyond a certain threshold is almost guaranteed to result in a deterioration of water quality. So the picture that is shown here is from Schindler's experiment on Lake 226, where carbon and nitrogen were added on the bottom of the lake. A curtain was put across, and carbon, nitrogen, and phosphorus were added on the top of the lake. And you can see the scum of algae that's formed on the surface as a result of the increase in phosphorus. So what that is showing is what happens when excess nutrients are added to the system. Now, not all blue-green algal blooms are nutrient-related blooms. Sometimes blooms can occur as a result at low phosphorus concentrations as a result of other factors, climate being one of the key ones that we think is important. But for the sake of the program, as it stands right now, why we are measuring phosphorus is because phosphorus is the nutrient that we can manage and need to manage in order to reduce algal blooms. Going through some of the results from this year in general, you'll see a lot of in general things were good. So generally speaking, phosphorus concentrations. So just to orient you on these figures, we take samples in the deep water. We take samples or you take samples, I suppose. I analyze samples in the deep water, samples in the near shore, and occasionally there are river sites as well. So the black bars on these graphs are the deep water samples. So that would be sort of a general idea of what's going on in the entire basin, whereas a nearshore sample is generally going to try and get at a specific point source or maybe a specific development. So when you see values in the nearshore being higher, that values in the nearshore for phosphorus are typically going to be higher. But we still want to monitor them for any extreme values. But in general, all of the black bars at Lake Joseph, as you can see here, are below 10. 10 is an important threshold. It's the provincial water quality objective for phosphorus in lakes. So above 10, the language used by the provincial government is aesthetic deterioration. So that would be increased macrophyte growth, increased algal growth, lower water clarity. Those sorts of things are what you expect when you increase phosphorus beyond 10 micrograms per liter. 20 is a high risk of, you increase your risk of algal blooms. There's good literature evidence to suggest that above 20, you're going to be much more susceptible to harmful algal blooms, to cyanobacterial blooms. So in general, Lake Joseph looked good. We didn't see anything above 10. There was a little bit of near shore elevated, but nothing out of the ordinary. Likewise in Rosso, we saw below 10 at all of the sites, at all of the sampling areas that were sampled. Near shore wise, we did see elevated spring total phosphorus at Brackenridge Bay. It was an outlier. The values, so you see the value there of 35. It's typically below 15. So that's been flagged for this year as a comparison. Sort of, is this a one-off, maybe a contaminated sample, or is something going on? Same with Minette. There's a couple. So we have a couple of samples in the near shore that were elevated. So I flagged those, and we continue to sample to see whether or not those are a cause for concern. And if we see continued increased sampling, then further action will be recommended. Lake Muskoka, again, the deep water phosphorus concentrations were all low. They were all below 10. Beaumaris, nearshore phosphorus was again an outlier. So those have been flagged for consideration for 2022. So when we sample those sites and have more data, we'll see whether or not they're elevated again. And if they are, then take further action. but generally all of the other samples we collected, and the deep water samples in particular, were below. Willow Beach was the other one. Sorry, I forgot to mention. Willow Beach was actually flagged this year. I'll get to that in a minute in the trends section. So we did flag Willow Beach this year for additional monitoring, and I'll talk about that in a moment. In addition to the 3 large lakes, there are a number of affiliate sites: Brandy Lake, Bruce Lake, Clear Lake, Gullwing Lake, Gull Lake, a number of river sites: Leonard Lake, Little Lake, Joseph, so on. We did see elevated phosphorus in Brandy Lake, which is a dystrophic lake. It's a high DOC lake that has typically had elevated phosphorus levels. It's had elevated phosphorus levels for the entire duration of the program, and phosphorus levels now in Brandy Lake are actually lower than they've ever been, which is why that one didn't get an urgent flag. Gullwing Lake, I suspect that 40 at Gullwing Lake is contamination, but we need to confirm it in 2022. So there was it's a very high phosphorus reading, atypical for that lake. And we'll be looking into it in more detail once we have if we get another high result like that, obviously, then we'll take further action and try and determine where that phosphorus might be coming from and why it's so out of character for that lake in the monitoring data set. New in 2021. So in 2018, the MLA hired me when I wasn't running the program to look at some of the long-term data that they had collected and to do a trend analysis. And at that time, we looked at largely the big lake sites on Muskoka, Rosso, and Joseph. But this year, using some statistical software that allows a lot of repeated analysis, I was able to run a trend analysis for all of the sites, all of the nearshore sites, excuse me. And all of the deep water sites as well. Willow Beach came out as the only significant long-term change over time. And it is a concerning trend, which is why it's been flagged for additional monitoring. So Willow Beach 3 is on Lake Muskoka. It's right at the mouth of an incoming stream. It seems my voice is going to go on me. There's quite a lot of development in the area. There's a resort in the area, there's golf carts in the area, there's a bunch of agriculture along that stream. So we have planned to do additional monitoring in 2022. The MLA is going to collect some samples for me from that stream and see if we can determine where the phosphorus is coming from and if there's management practices or steps that we can take in order to try and reduce the phosphorus that's coming in at that site. Because it is a rather dramatic increase and it is sustained over time, which is what we're looking for and which is what the concern is. So in addition to phosphorus, we take consideration for algal blooms in the district. We don't actually collect the data ourselves, but we do try and track blooms that are occurring. Phosphorus control, you see here why phosphorus control is important. Increased phosphorus concentrations, you see why algal blooms are increasing. I suppose this doesn't necessarily say why phosphorus is important because phosphorus is declining during this period, but cyanobacteria blooms are on the rise. Phosphorus concentrations are staying steady or going down in a lot of places, but cyanobacteria is increasing anyway. And some of that is driven by climate. And some of that is driven by factors that are still trying to be understood even after 10, 15 years worth of studies. So we can't speak to the climate side of things directly with the data that we collect, but it is something that I've been working with the district on causation studies and that sort of thing. And we've seen some striking evidence of climate impacts as well. For our data set, there were 16 confirmed blooms in 2020 when the program was shut down and 14 confirmed blooms in 2021. I'm planning to continue to compile this data set back and further and see how that's changed with just the just within the MLA's region. But there's a large number of blooms happening, and certainly more blooms than historically have been recorded. Some of that is reporting bias, or can be reporting bias. More people are aware of blooms and therefore are reporting blooms, and there's more sampling being done of those blooms. But the evidence in the literature suggests that blooms are going up as well, not just the reporting side of things. In addition to total phosphorus, we monitor bacteria, E. coli specifically. Bacteria plays a very important role in health risks associated with sewage from septic systems or contamination from birds and so on. So fecal contamination of drinking water is a concern, and E. coli is a good predictor of gastrointestinal illness in recreational freshwater. So if the E. coli is high in the water, there's a good probability that people who are swimming in that water or are skiing in that water could get sick. Excuse me. So 10 sites of the in 5 sampling areas exceeded our our yellow light limit in 2021. Coincided with, in this case, I am sorry, I am losing my voice. The reason that this isn't a cause for higher concern right now is because one of the things that I noted when analyzing the data is that sampling events in 2021 were done during significant rainfall events, 3 out of 4 times in some cases. And so we made a correction to the protocol for sampling in 2022 to try and see whether or not we've accidentally biased the data set by sampling too much during rainfall events in 2021. So stay tuned for more on bacteria, but I don't want to overstate the results because there were certainly some concerns with the way that the data was collected. So that's something that we've discussed internally. To the grading system. We mentioned this earlier, so I'll just put up the grades for 2021 and try and get through the last few slides of this before I possibly keel over and die on you guys. I'm sorry. There were yellow lights at 11 stations in 2021 and 1 red light. The red light I already mentioned is Willow Beach. That long-term phosphorus increase. 4 out of the 11 sampling areas were the results of the yellow lights sample areas were the results of elevated bacteria concentrations, and 5 were the results of cyanobacterial blooms that occurred in between 2018 and 2021. Sorry. Compare that to 2019, it's actually very similar. In 2019, there were 10 yellow lights and 1 red light. So it's not to say that these 11 yellow lights and 1 red light suggest things are necessarily getting demonstrably worse. Just that there are still some issues. There are hotspots of bacteria that we're working on determining the cause of. There are elevated phosphorus values in areas that are being looked into in more detail. So while generally phosphorus concentrations are low, and water quality looks fairly good, there is still certainly causes for concern. Excuse me. Recommendations. So our recommendations included additional sampling at Gullwing and Willow Beach, including some duplicate sampling at Gullwing Lake to ensure that contamination, if it occurs in the sample, can be accounted for. And as I said, we've recommended that the phosphorus sampling during storm events be limited, or that data be analyzed separately so that it doesn't bias our results. Because if you sample too much during storm events, you naturally, particularly in the near shore, you get a flood of runoff from the shore that leads to higher phosphorus concentrations. It leads to higher bacteria concentrations, and it makes the data non-comparable between years. So for looking at things over the long term, it makes it very difficult for us to say whether or not it's changing if we change the way we're sampling. So with that, I will thank you guys very much. I am very sorry that my voice seems to have gone during the presentation, but I made it through.
It's Murphy's Law. That's what happens. It's you're fine until you start talking. So before you leave us right now, Chris, there are a couple of just quick questions that would help to clarify some of the information in your presentation. So I'm just going to ask them to you now from the Q&A box. What's the depth of deep water samples versus those of the near shore? So what kind of water depths are we talking about that we sample in?
Depth of the water is going to vary depending on the sampling area. So when we say deep water, we basically mean the deep spot in that sampling area. So if it's an abatement on Lake Muskoka, it could be, 100 meters deep. If it's on Leonard Lake, it could be 15 meters deep. So what we mean when we mean deep water is we basically mean the deepest basin of that water body or that section of water body.
Great. Okay. And then one other one is that whether near shore phosphorus samples are collected only in spring or throughout the season as well.
Near shore samples are collected throughout the year as well.
Great. Okay. That just a couple of people can have that clarification before we move on to our next speaker. So thank you, Chris. We'll let you recover for the question and answer round. All right. Next up, we have Rebecca Willison. She's back by popular demand. If you attended our nearshore seminar last year, where we talked about the riparian area of the lakes and what we can do to keep that healthy, Rebecca was one of our speakers. So thank you, Rebecca, for agreeing to join us again today. Rebecca is the watershed planning technician for the Muskoka Watershed Council and the District of Muskoka. She has a degree in zoology and a certificate in environmental conservation from the University of Guelph, as well as a certificate in restoration ecology from Niagara College. Through her work with the district and the Muskoka Watershed Council, Rebecca is active in promoting good stewardship practices across our watersheds with an emphasis on maintaining good water quality. So Rebecca, take it away. You can put your camera on. I don't see you yet.
I'm here. I'm good to
Oh,
go.
you're there? Okay.
Yep.
There you are. There you go. Okay, great.
Thank you for the invitation to speak tonight on what we all can do collectively to help keep our water healthy. It's basically comes down to us. We're the best ones who can take that on. So I'm just here to provide some maybe tips and tricks and ideas on what you can do around your property to help keep our water healthy. And get my presentation to move forward. There we go.
Sometimes it just makes you think about it a little bit.
So we've heard tonight a little bit about some of the issues that can affect our water quality from Chris Craig and Chris Hadley. What might surprise you to learn is that a lot of these issues listed on this slide. So we learned about increased phosphorus, decreased calcium, increased chloride, increased bacteria and algae. A lot of these issues actually stem from what we do on the land as opposed to what we do directly into the water. So what we do on our properties can impact our water quality as opposed to just, obviously we're not going to be dumping phosphorus directly into the lakes, but when we apply phosphorus to the land, that will generally eventually end up into the lake. So when I say a lot of the issues listed here can be directly influenced by what we do on land, the items in blue are examples of that. So everything we do on our waterfront property, even the surrounding land, can impact the health of our shoreline and eventually our water quality. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight is what we can do on our properties to help protect our water quality. So how does what we do on land impact our water quality? I'm sure you've noticed on your property, on neighboring properties, that the land pretty much always slopes down to the water body, whether it's a lake or a river. The land usually slopes right down to it. And what that means is that the precipitation and water flows from your property and all of the surrounding land flows into the water body. And when it does, it carries with it all the chemicals, the nutrients, and the materials like soil and sediment that could impact our water quality. When it comes to protecting our water quality, we need to pay attention to the flow of water on our land. By minimizing and delaying stormwater runoff from a property will control erosion and will improve the effectiveness of our soil and vegetation in preventing ammonia, phosphorus, and harmful bacteria from entering into our water. All these things that we're already monitoring for. This is how we make the levels get down to where it's more acceptable. As impermeable surfaces like roofs and driveways are added to our property, it's also adding new sources and higher volumes of stormwater and runoff to be managed, while also reducing the amount of permeable surfaces on our property that will absorb the water. This is why a naturally vegetated shoreline is crucial to protecting our water quality. And in my opinion, is really the #1 action that we can take on our property. Some of the most important actions you can take to protect water quality don't take place in the water, but instead on the land, on your property. We really need to get away from just looking at what we're doing right in the riparian area, as you can see on this slide, which is essentially right at the shoreline area. And instead, consider what we do in all 3 of these zones and beyond. We need to start taking more of a watershed-wide view instead of just a lake-wide view. So there are already quite a few great resources available to outline some of the simple actions that we can do on our properties to help improve or maintain water quality. We are very fortunate in Muskoka. We generally have really good water quality. So oftentimes what our actions do is protect that, maintain it. Unfortunately, we do have some areas where the water quality might be a bit degraded. And so our actions in those cases can help improve it. Some of these resources are the Clean and Green 13, created by Muskoka Watershed Council, and Seguin Township has also produced this 12 Steps to Success. I think if you look through these lists, you'll probably find that you're already doing quite a few of these actions, which is really great. Being a good steward means doing the little things on your property that can add up to big results. For those of you who are looking for more of a detailed resource, Watershed Council has produced a Living in Cottage Country handbook that we sell. And it's a really great resource if you're just looking for sort of an overall general reference guide for how to live a little bit more friendly on your property. So I'm going to briefly talk about the different points listed on the right of the slide here. And as it is no surprise, the first one is keeping your shoreline healthy, natural, and enhancing it if possible. As I said already, and if you've seen any presentations from me in the past, I've said this plenty, but really the #1 thing you can do for your property is to have that natural shoreline. And if you already have a natural shoreline, congratulations, you're already ahead of the curve. But honestly, there's almost always room for improvement. So, you know, hopefully there's some other actions that you can take to further improve your property. So when I say have a healthy shoreline, what does that mean? Well, it means that you have a shoreline that's full of vegetation, different species, different ages, different heights. Really, the more species that you can have on your property, native species, the better your shoreline will be able to, the more resilient it will be, especially in the face of things like climate change and flooding and invasive species. The healthier shoreline generally increases the number of different plants increases. Your healthy shoreline will also have different levels of vegetation. So it's not just the full-grown trees that we do see on many properties. It's also all the understory vegetation, the native grasses, wildflowers, ferns, the shrubs, the tree seedlings, all coming up, different ages. You know, all of that really lends itself to a healthy property. In addition to the healthy plants, native plants, you should also have, if you are fortunate to have them on your property, you want to protect those standing dead trees, fallen logs. different sizes of stones and rocks. All of these components help to create structure and habitat for wildlife. So please try to resist the urge to clean up and tidy up your property. Really, it's better for wildlife, better for nature, and it also gives you a little bit of extra time to enjoy at the cottage, where you don't have to actually do anything. Your shoreline doesn't have to be completely impassable to be healthy. You can add narrow pathways and trim tree branches and shrubs instead of removing them to create paths to access the water. You can create a private, private retreat without sacrificing the environment. You can have a beautifully framed view of the water without sacrificing the water quality. Another good measure of a healthy shoreline is the amount of wildlife you find there, whether it's birds, fish, mammals, amphibians, or insects. Wildlife will be attracted to areas where there's good habitat. So if you do find lots of different species of wildlife on your property, then that means that you've created good habitat for them. So a big component of my job in the stewardship messaging that we do is to promote native plants. And some people might be wondering, well, why native plants? Why not, my lawn? My lawn, it's vegetation, so isn't it a good buffer? Or, hydrangeas, daylilies, some of these are common horticultural non-native species that people have on their properties. And while, plants are better than none unless they're invasive, native species do tend to be a little bit, not a little bit, tend to have a lot more benefit. So just looking at this diagram, you'll see native species are on the right of the slide. Non-native species are on the left. And obviously the most striking thing you'll take away from this, hopefully, is the root systems. So if we're hoping that our natural shoreline and our buffer area, the function is to slow down runoff. It's to absorb nutrients and to prevent erosion. And obviously plants that have a bigger and better root structure will function much better than those that don't. So there's quite a big comparison here. If we look at Kentucky bluegrass, which is our usual turf grass, there's not much of a root system here. They're not going to be very good if you just have a straight lawn to the water. It's not going to be a very good, it's not very good to slow down runoff and allow it to soak into the ground. I consider turf grass lawns to be semi-permeable. They're not quite as bad as something like stone or a roof hardened structure that completely prevents water from soaking in. But they aren't quite as good at slowing down and allowing runoff to soak in as a natural shoreline. The other thing to consider is that when we do have lawns, we do have highly manicured lawns, just the very action of maintaining those, so the watering and the mowing, and sometimes we even out or level the ground to make it, more pretty, I guess, or easier to mow. Those very actions are what also make the lawn less less permeable, really. So compacting the soil and stuff will affect the water flow and affect the lawn's ability to absorb water. And also, as we've talked a little bit about already, with bacteria is a big concern. And as a lot of people on the call probably know, great expanse of lawn tend to attract the unwanted wildlife that we often see. So things like Canada geese. You're not going to find Canada geese inhabiting properties that have quite a natural shoreline, but you will often find them in areas where there is large expanses of lawn. So when we get to talking about minimizing impervious surfaces, I already mentioned a little bit about how the more impervious surfaces you put on your property, the less surface is available to help soak in water. The area on our property is finite. So, the more impervious surfaces you're adding, the less permeable or areas that water can soak into the ground you have. So it is important to be aware of what impervious surfaces you already have on your property or are planning on adding to your property, and try to mitigate that wherever you can. So one example I use is stone steps. I know they're beautiful and a lot of people like to put in stone steps, but stone is an impermeable surface. So you're adding an impermeable surface, so water can't soak through stone. What it does instead is it collects on the side and runs down. So you start to get erosion on the side of your stone steps if it's not well vegetated. One alternative is to install stairs that are elevated. So they're up on stringers, they're elevated. They have no back on the steps. And if you leave little 1-inch gaps on the boards, on the treads, then it allows sunlight and water to fall through the steps and nourish the vegetation below. So first of all, you're not impacting the property during installation as much. Stone steps tend to use larger equipment to install, and you're disturbing more ground. So you're increasing the chance of erosion. So with the steps being elevated, you can maintain the vegetation underneath the steps, which, as we talked about, helps slow down and runoff and allow it to soak in. So, there's little tweaks that you can do on your property to help mitigate some of the unavoidable impermeable surfaces we have, like our roofs and decks. There's ways that we can mitigate that. Maintain your septic system is a pretty standard, what we can do to protect our water quality. Those of you around the table who are in the township of Muskoka Lakes, you're pretty fortunate because you do have a great septic system inspector who's very knowledgeable, who works at the township and is great to answer questions. But I think the first thing that you need to know when it comes to septic systems is to know where it is, and to know how the general gist of how your septic system works. Just by having that little bit of knowledge, it will definitely help you protect and maintain your system. You also want to inspect your system regularly and have it pumped out as needed. The general rule of thumb is 3 to 5 years, but it will depend on how much you use your system. If you do have an effluent filter, which most new systems do have one installed, you'll want to clean that out probably annually as well. So those components you want to maintain. And you also want to treat your system right. So you want to avoid putting too much water into the system. So if you know that you're having a crowd, like you're having a party or you're having a lot of people visiting, you'll want to keep track of how much water is getting dumped into the system and perhaps limit that as much as possible. So you don't want to overload it. You don't want to put stuff down your septic system that shouldn't be going down there. So things like harsh chemicals, additives, food scraps, you generally don't want to put those down your system. And then you also want to take care of your tile beds. So what does that mean? That means making sure that it's well vegetated, but not with woody vegetation. So any trees or shrubs you see starting to get a hold on your septic system, you'll want to remove those right away, but you want to make sure there's herbaceous vegetation on your system. You want to make sure that nothing's built over top of your septic system. You're not parking on it. It's not a driveway. You haven't built a deck over top of it. None of those are good for your system. And of course, driving over top of it with heavy vehicles would be a no-no as well. So a big thing that you can do too is actually get involved in citizen science programs. So really, we don't know the state of our environment if we're not monitoring it. And there's a lot of different programs. Unfortunately, due to cutbacks through the different levels of government, we're not always able to monitor as well today through those resources as we have been in the past. So it falls on us to actually get involved and start doing it ourselves. And you know what, it's a great way to learn about the environment and to get interested in it and to care about it. So and the good news is there's also, honestly, no matter what your interest is in, there's probably a monitoring program for it, a citizen science program for it. So, there's many listed here, but there's so many more. If you're if dragonflies are your thing, there's a whole monitoring program around dragonflies or bumblebees or, different species of birds. There's tons of different bird programs. Loon Survey, of course, is one of the most popular ones. Water quality monitoring. We just learned about the MLA's water quality initiative, and they're always looking for volunteers. So you know what? It doesn't take much time, but it's a lot of fun. And honestly, it feels good to be collecting data that contributes to helping us monitor and protect our environment. Other programs like the Lake Partner Program, Watershed Council's Algae Monitoring Program, bio blitzes. I mean, there's no shortage of programs that you can get involved in. So I strongly encourage everyone to get involved in something, no matter what your interest is. I'm sure there's a program for you. And my final point is to spread the word. A lot of us are already doing really great things on our property, and we need to let people know about that so that, the more people are talking about it, the more accepted it becomes, and the more we can get other people interested in it. So whether it's posting a sign, letting people know that, hey, this is your pollinator garden, or you're renaturalizing your shoreline for water quality and wildlife, you can post a sign. You can talk to neighbors, encourage them to maybe plant native species instead of that invasive ones like periwinkle or goutweed. And you can also write articles for, I know most lake associations are always looking for contributors to some of their newsletters and stuff. So, if you're doing something really cool, write up a brief article about it and get the information out there. Social media is also really great for posting, quick little tidbits to try to get people interested in learning new things. So there's no shortage of ways that we all can contribute to water quality, whether it's improving it or protecting it. I've just outlined a few here, but there's tons of resources available. And I know that the MLA folks who've hosted this webinar have put together a list of some resources that they're going to share with everybody. So, I strongly encourage you all to get involved. And I'll turn it back over to Deb for managing the question and answer period. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. That was great. I feel very inspired, and I know I've done a few good things, but there are a couple things that I probably haven't done well. But so we are just want to thank our speakers first, Chris, the two Chris's, and Rebecca. Thank you for preparing so well and delivering your presentation so nicely. That I'm sure I learned something, and I'm sure others will have learned something as well. So we're now into the question and answer part of the webinar. This is your opportunity to ask questions of our experts. I know some of the questions have been asked in the chat or answered in the chats or in the box itself in written form, but don't answer them all, folks. Let's have some discussion up front. So just a reminder, in the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen, if you'd like to ask a question, just type it in and the panelists will answer it for you. And you can vote up the question. If you like something, someone else already put in, just say you like it and it'll take it to the top of the screen. So I'm just going to get us started off while you guys are putting some questions in the box. So I'll start maybe Chris Craig for this one. If water quality is staying pretty consistently good, why does the MLA continue to do all this monitoring at so many places and so often? Maybe we don't need to do as much. What do you think?
Oh, we definitely need to keep going to make sure that things stay good. No time like the present to kind of fall off a good program and have things go bad. We don't want that to happen. So we keep on top of all the spots where things might go bad to ensure they stay good.
Good point. Chris or Rebecca, do you want to weigh in on why monitoring is an important thing to keep going, even if it doesn't seem to show anything that's really dramatic?
I just like to add that, I think looking at long-term trends is really important. So the longer data sets that we can get, you don't necessarily know that something will be an issue until maybe 20, 30, 40 years down the road, right? So the more data we can collect, the better. And then that helps us, better prepare for what might be coming down the road.
Good point. Chris Hadley?
Managing water quality is always easier to do before a problem is in place. If you get a whole bunch of phosphorus loading into the system while you're not monitoring, and it's not a problem because you don't see a problem, it's accumulating in the sediment, and that phosphorus isn't going anywhere. And you can get phosphorus release from sediment. You can have nearshore problems. I mean, we saw while water quality is generally good in the MLA's data set, there are areas where we have concerns. And just because you have a low phosphorus concentration in the deep water doesn't mean that your nearshore doesn't necessarily have sources of phosphorus or potential issues. We had a question earlier that I answered about large mats of milfoil growth and what causes large mats of milfoil growth. I mean, some aquatic vegetation is natural, and you can't expect a lake to not have aquatic vegetation, but large overgrowth of aquatic macrophytes can be a sign of a local source, just a particular property or set of properties that aren't affecting the overall water quality, but are causing those sorts of nuisance growths within their immediate area. It's not the only cause of macrophyte growth, but so I would say that ongoing monitoring is very important.
Great. I'm glad to hear your voice back, by the way. So I hope we won't take it away. Well, and I think one of the things that, I'm really proud of the MLA having rung the bell on a few places where we saw things happening. And we're not going to be the guys who go out and actually do the work to change it, but we want to, as Rebecca mentions, educate others about it. And to highlight to someone else that there's a problem here. And one of those areas was Manette a few years ago, where we'd seen some really weird results, and it turned out there was some septic bypass that was going on, and we were able to get that addressed through the municipality because we had that information. So it is important to do so. Okay, so there's a lot of talk these days. Certainly the MLA has been very much engaged in some what I'll call fairly egregious land clearing and land use changes where there's, of course, through the new official plan, there's talk about increasing lot sizes around the lakes. So one of the things one of the arguments people make to us is that, well, water quality is getting better. Why does it matter if we limit development around the lakes? So I'd like to spend a moment just talking about why that's still important to be considering the limits on development. And Rebecca, you talked a little bit about those things, but maybe Chris Hadley, you could start us off, and then others can weigh in on why we need to continue to manage development around the lakes.
I think a lot of the same reasons that continuing to monitor is important. Rebecca, during her presentation, talked about impervious surfaces, and we've seen pretty good water quality overall in the lakes. But if you start clearing a bunch of land, you're going to create whether it's lawn or impervious surfaces that you're creating, you're going to create more runoff. You're going to bring more nutrients into the water. You might not see increases across the entire lake as a result of that, but you could start to see, like I mentioned earlier, localized disturbances, small algal blooms within a bay, or macrophyte growth near a cleared area, those sorts of things. So I think it's very important to continue to promote good stewardship and sustainable practices for land clearance.
Rebecca, do you want in on that?
No, I think Chris answered it very well.
And Craig, you want to say anything in particular?
I think Chris had the gist of it. Anytime you disturb the area around a lake, you're removing vegetation, which otherwise is capturing runoff. You're upsetting the ecosystem. So if you can confine your development to a swath of land behind a natural barrier, it's better for the lake. And where you do put it, try and cut down on impervious surfaces and make sure that what you're doing is the best you can manage, environmentally friendly.
One of the things I've been seeing a lot in the various magazines that show up promoting various, great properties in Muskoka is very much a tidying up of the forest around the base of the trees. And I have to admit, I have to go out and yell at my husband every so often to stop doing that. But talk to us a little bit about the impact that has of basically removing that layer under the trees, so the duff that I call it the duff. So talk to us a little bit about that and the importance for runoff.
Well, not only does it capture the runoff, but it's when that vegetative matter kind of breaks down, it returns the calcium to the soil, and it's the cleanup of this calcium bearing material that has given us the problems with low calcium in the lakes and thin shells on shelled animals and poor skeletons on the crayfish, and it works its way right up to eggs for loons and other water birds. So what seems like a good idea in cleaning things up is actually not a good idea at all. We should leave that stuff, even if it's not attractive, because it's necessary for the balance of the life in the water and next to the water, and we should be maintaining that.
And sometimes that's where I found the little teeny weeny frogs hopping around too. So little peepers and wood frogs. Rebecca, you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I agree with Chris. I think that was a good answer. Also, the more vegetation we have on our property, I know flooding is a big concern for a lot of people. So, as we start to see more severe weather events and potentially flooding, all that vegetation on our property does help to mitigate the impacts of that. So whether it's slowing down the fall of rain during a heavy rainstorm and breaking that velocity so that when it does make its way down to the ground, it's not hitting it as hard as it can be. It's just sort of gently tapping it, and that again allows it to soak into the ground. It prevents erosion, but also a lot our trees and our shrubs and our vegetation transpire a lot of the water back up into the atmosphere, right? So whether it's a flooding event, it'll help dry out your property quicker. Also, vegetation helps keep the water from making it quite as far up on your property because it's a little bit of a barrier between the lake and your structure. So, there's so much value to having that understory vegetation, to not just keeping the large trees, to having all of it underneath as well, including wildlife habitat, but also erosion and nutrient uptake. And I mean, all sorts of benefits to having it. So, and then you have extra time because you're not spending it cleaning up your property all the time.
Exactly. More time on the dock. Perfect. So we do a few questions in the Q&A box that I'm going to run through. So there's a question about can you buy buffalo grass somewhere? And if anybody knows whether there's native plant nurseries up our way.
I will give a couple plugs. So there is a native plant nursery open to the public down in Kilworthy area called Hidden Habitat. And they carry quite a few plants, and they're a really good resource. There's also a lot of native plant sales that go on this time of year. So Georgian Bay Biosphere has a native plant sale. Muskoka Conservancy has a native plant sale. There's a few going on. So that's, and of course the MLA has their seedling day, which is a really
Thank you
for getting vegetation.
Public service announcement. Yeah.
We also can get some plants, native plants through our Natural Edge program as well. So if you do have trouble sort of finding it, sourcing it through Muskoka nurseries, then certainly, reach out to me and I can see if I can find it through some of my sources. But there's, the more we're out there asking for native plants from our nurseries, the more apt they are to actually carry them. So please ask.
Great, thank you. This one I think is up for you, Chris Hadley. What's the cause of the foam seen during our high winds? Any thoughts on that?
The foam tends to be natural, so organic matter breaking down creates what's called a surfactant or a surface agent, which has an effect on the surface tension of the water, and it makes it more susceptible to foaming during high winds. Historically speaking, there has been chemical agents and stuff like that can also cause a similar effect, but in Ontario lakes, generally speaking, it is a natural phenomenon.
Well, glad to hear that, as opposed to it being somebody dumped a bunch of palm olive on the other side of the lake and it shows up on my side. So,
Well, that would do it too.
yeah, I'm sure it would. Does the MLA have equipment available for loan or rent for DO and temperature profiles? Chris?
No, we don't. Short answer.
I didn't think so, but there's one on ticks. I'm just going to leave it to the end, see if we have enough time on that one. What is swimmer's itch and how does it affect the body? I know I got it one day. It wasn't nice in my ears. Anybody want to tackle that one?
It's a parasite. Swimmer's itch is a parasite. I believe, I'm not an expert on swimmer's itch, but I believe the sources of swimmer's itch is thought to be waterfowl fecal matter is one of the big ones. So your goose poop is a source. Yeah, I don't know a huge amount about swimmer's itch in terms of exactly how it acts on the body. I would need to research that one for you to provide a proper full answer, but yeah, it is a parasite.
Yeah, I can elaborate if you like.
Sure, yeah.
It's basically a parasite that has both waterfowl and snails as part of its as hosts. So you tend to find swimmer's itch in more shallow areas where there's snails and waterfowl, where they're in similar areas. And what it is the larva of the parasite is going through the water and trying to find a new host, and it finds you instead of a snail or and what it does is it tries to burrow into your skin. Now, if it does burrow into the skin, it doesn't survive because we're not a host for it, but that's what causes the irritation. So, it's a pretty easy fix. Just make sure when you do get out of the water to towel yourself off briskly. Just the act of brushing off yourself, drying yourself off, will dislodge any sort of parasites. So it's a pretty easy thing to manage, but it can definitely be annoying.
So here's a scientific one coming up here. Is the trend through the years for bacteria sampling stations more important than moving stations to areas with potential new sources of problems? So maintaining a site and long-term record versus going to find those places that, or is it a bit of both? I mean, Chris Hadley, I think that would be one for you.
I would say a bit of both. Historically speaking, this is my first year with the program, so I didn't recommend removing any sites or adding any specific additional ones this year. That was something that we talked about at the outset. Myself and the MLA, I wanted to get familiar with the program first. But having said that, if you have a station that has had a long-term data set that has had historically low bacteria concentrations and you want to move those resources elsewhere and start a new station in an area of concern, that's certainly something you can do. I would warn against doing that too frequently. We are the long-term nature of the program, as we were mentioning earlier, the goal is to catch problems where they arise. And if you move that sampling site or eliminate that sampling site and then something changes in that area, you could end up missing something. So I don't like eliminating sample sites, but if you have a 15-year record with, non-detects and bacteria, moving that site somewhere else is certainly, and nothing is expected to be developed or nothing is expected to be changed in that area, moving that site somewhere else is certainly a legitimate consideration on a case-by-case basis.
Great. There is another one here about when we were talking about the milfoil previously, but the question is it a sign of water quality degradation to have milfoil coming in, or what is it a sign of?
Milfoil is an invasive species, like I typed in the chat, and it's very, very good at outcompeting native macrophytes, and it and starry stonewort is the other one, will absolutely wipe out everything else in the area by just simply growing faster, shading it out and out competing it. Is it an indication? Aquatic macrophytes in general are not an indication of deteriorated water quality necessarily. They're a part of a natural aquatic ecosystem. They're necessary for your Daphnia and other cladostrins that Chris was talking about, to provide them some refuge from fish. So having macrophyte growth within a natural water body is very normal. Excessive growth, or a dramatic change in growth could certainly be an indication of a nutrient source in the area, a local nutrient source. So whether which could be considered degraded water quality. So it could be a bit of both.
Certainly, one of the things you have to be very careful about with milfoil is when you cut it, because it cuts in it. When it cuts, if you cut it and let it float around, it'll go root itself again. So you actually make the problem worse. Even though you thought you were going to improve your condition, it can actually exacerbate it. So
yeah, starry
Rebecca,
stone wood is starry stone wood is the exact same way. Yeah, if you cut it, if you tear it, it just reroots.
And so with boat motors going through it, it would tear it and do the same. So those are kind of the things that you have to watch out with milfoil. Rebecca, did you want anything else about that? Are you? No.
Nope, that was a great answer.
All right, good. Well, I think one of the ones I'm just looking to see if about the one here with about ticks. So maybe we've got time for one more question, and so I will turn this one over to you, Rebecca. There seem to be growing issues with human and pet exposure to ticks in many areas. Any suggestions of how to minimize issues with ticks while maintaining and augmenting natural areas around cottage properties? And I will tell members that the ticks will be mentioned in our upcoming shorelines, so stay tuned for that. But in the meantime, Rebecca, go ahead.
Well, I'm not a tick expert, but their expansion of the range obviously is related to climate change, and it's just one of the invasive species that new vectors that we might see coming in due to a more habitable environment that we've got for them now. There are some small things you can do. There are some non-native species, plant species that do encourage ticks. So things like boxwood, you want to avoid those on your property because they can, I know it's a surprise, they can actually encourage the proliferation of ticks. So I think honestly is having a natural property as much as possible, by having, you're encouraging the wildlife that will help manage the ticks and keep them keep them from proliferating too much. Same with really any sort of pest species, unless it's an invasive one that doesn't really have any natural enemies in our area. Usually the more natural your property will be, the better, the more holistic your environment will be, and then it'll keep everything will keep each other in balance, right? That's what we want to do, is try to keep things in balance. And I know people hate things like mosquitoes and black flies and stuff, but they're actually a pretty important part of the environment. And by having, having good habitat for the other insects that feed on those, as well as bats and stuff, you can sort of keep them in control in a little bit of more of a natural way instead of spraying. There's my plug against spraying.
Perfect. Well, no, the other one that's not natural is Canada geese. They may be a native species, but they've become a different species today. And so you can do your part to keep that in balance too, by getting rid of your front lawn on the property. So that's all the time we have for our questions. Thank you guys for answering them, and thank you to our participants for providing your questions. I appreciate the engagement. I wish we could see you and have that engagement one-to-one, but anyway, that's the way it is. So I'm just going to thank our speakers for preparing with us today, and for providing their time and energies to help you understand a little bit more about our water quality program. We did have about 78 people on the line, so thank you for joining us. Your presentations were terrific, folks, and I'm sorry we did have to limit the time, but as I know there's lots more we could say on the topic. We have some resources I think we're going to put up on the screen here to in case anybody wants to find out more and find more information. I know some of you on the line tonight are already volunteering to sample water quality, and if you've ever wanted to do so, for those of you who aren't already, we'd love to hear from you, and we were going to put the contact information up on the screen as well, but I'm not seeing either of them at this point. So is it coming up? Oh, there we go. Takes a minute sometimes. All right, so there's some resources that and that will be, they'll be with the saved presentation on the MLA website. And then the if you want to be a water quality volunteer, you can see the website there, MLA/volunteer, and we do our water quality training session coming up on May, is it 19th, Chris, I think? Yes?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So if you have an interest, you're welcome to join us for that and determine if it's something that you might like to do more of. We also are always looking for volunteers for our environment committee. So if you have interest in being on that committee, we'd be also happy to hear from you. Chris is the chair of that and would be happy to hear, as well as I would. So, this event has been brought to you tonight by the Muskoka Lakes Association. We are the oldest lake association in Canada, serving our waterfront landowners since 1894, as Chris mentioned. We represent over 2,000 member families, which we estimated over 11,000 people on the lakes. The Muskoka Lakes Association is a volunteer, membership-based organization, and we advocate for the responsible stewardship and enjoyment of the unique environment of the Muskoka Lakes. Our priorities are to monitor, communicate, and advocate for Muskoka's natural environment, which is exactly what we did tonight. To advocate on behalf of Muskoka property owners for responsible land use and reasonable taxation, to promote the Muskoka Lakes culture and give back to the greater Muskoka community, and to increase partnerships with like-minded organizations throughout Muskoka, advocate and educate collectively on important Muskoka matters. If you're a member of the MLA, we thank you and urge you to continue to renew your membership as it makes this water quality monitoring program possible. And if you're not a member, what's stopping you? If water quality is important to you, that's one of the things that we do on your behalf. One more thing to do before you leave is we're going to have our last polls on the screen just to tell you, we'd like to hear feedback on how informative the webinar was tonight, and to allow you to provide any feedback that you'd like to give us. A reminder that the webinar has been recorded and will be posted on the MLA website for anyone to watch. Give us a couple of days to get it posted, and we'll follow up with the answers to questions if there were any additional ones that we missed as best we can.
It looks like we lost Deb at the end here. It might just be that her internet dropped out. I'm going to share the results of the webinar, so of the poll question, so everyone can see it. It's awesome that everyone found this informative, and we'll follow up on those who want to become a water quality volunteer. Thanks so much for joining us for this webinar, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.